Welcome to another special episode of the Level Up Fishing Podcast. I am your host, Stormy Cochran, and I am so excited for this episode today. I have been wanting to tackle angler interviews for a very long time. I love listening to people's stories and hearing how they got started, what they love about fishing, their favorite species to tackle, lake, area, everything. I love hearing about it. And so I have wanted to do angler interviews for over a year now, and I just haven't been able to tackle it. But today we officially made it happen, and I got to do my very first angler interview. And I thought, who better to interview than the person who started me on this journey, who started GSO fishing, my best friend, my husband, Andy Cochran. Now, I am completely biased. I think Andy is hands down the best fisherman I have ever met, and I will believe that my entire life. You can never tell me any different. He is incredibly smart, and he really, really digs into the why and the how of fishing. I love to see how his brain works. Not only that, but Andy's resume speaks for itself. He loves fishing. He's been doing it for most of his life. He has been a fly fishing instructor, a radio host. He's been on a TV show. He has done so much with his love of fishing. And then he started GSO Fishing. And I couldn't be more proud of how hard he has worked to help share his passion and what he loves with other anglers. So without giving too much away about this incredible episode, I am excited to invite you into this conversation that I got to have with my best friend, my fishing partner and instructor, and my amazing husband, Andy Cochran.
Well, that was quite thoughtful. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you have been guiding for 19 years now, since 2006. This is actually what we consider our March as our anniversary month of getting started. So you have a huge history of fishing and guiding. Can you talk about how GSO was founded?
Yeah, like you sort of mentioned nicely, is I'm old and I've been doing this forever.
That's not what I said.
But yes, it had to start somewhere.
Mhm.
And so I worked at Gene Taylor Sporting Goods. I have worked there for even longer than that, almost 24 years. And prior to that, I came to Gunnison to go to Western State College. So, fun fact, I was actually recruited by Western State College to run track. That was my wheelhouse sport. And the track program was far too involved and was going to cut into my hunting and fishing time. So I opted out of that scholarship because I didn't really need the help at the time with any of that. And I wasn't going to be like an Olympic track athlete. So I didn't really see that as being a career choice. So I ended up signing up and going to Western anyways, and with a business degree and entrepreneurship emphasis. And like, maybe not like college kids now, but college kids back then, we worked 3 or 4 jobs, plus we took our full workload of classes. And so one of the other appeals to the Gunnison area versus where I grew up was just the vast amount of fishing here. And so that was the most appealing thing that brought me to Gunnison to start with. And one of the many jobs I had that obviously stuck was I got hired at Gene Taylor's because I was very persistent and I bugged them until they hired me because that's what I really wanted to do, was be in that industry.
They're pretty lucky. 24 years later, you're still there.
And so that was kind of where all of that came from. And then my first several years fishing there, really my history with fishing was for the most part fly fishing. I'm sure a lot of people didn't know that either.
No.
And so when I was going to college here, I actually, they did a student professor program at the college, and I was a student professor of the fly fishing class for 2 semesters, because we only did it in the spring semester. So I did that, and so I was, we're pretty well rounded in the fly world. But as I worked at Gene Taylor's and started learning more about all the reservoirs and all the stillwater fishing, that was like a whole new world. For the most part, I'd had tastes of it growing up, where I had a cousin that was a charter boat deckhand on the Great Lakes. And so growing up, I actually used to fish with him every summer on Lake Michigan. And so I learned a lot about all of that sort of stuff. But it was so far out of my wheelhouse and where I lived that none of it really stuck. But it was always in the back of my mind. So then when I started learning about, Blue Mesa and Taylor and these big trophy fish, and it's just such a different world, and boats and all that, and how all that stuff worked. A lot of that stuff that I had picked up on Lake Michigan started to make sense. It was like, because it's the same thing. It's boats, and it's water, and it's trout, and it's salmon, and I was like, well, shoot, yeah, I kind of know how to do all that already, actually. Or I've been around it quite a bit, because I ended up, when my cousin had graduated, I went to work for that charter boat captain for 2 months one summer. My cousin had graduated, and that captain needed some help in the summer, so I jumped in. I didn't do a ton of trips, maybe like 10 or 12, where I deckhanded for him and kind of stepped into my cousin's role. And so I had a whole lot of hands-on training from him, which was super fun. It was downriggers and dipsy divers and planer boards and sonar and lures and all this stuff that was so foreign to somebody that just fly fishes for trout. So that was when I started learning that's how you could fish here. Then of course it was very intriguing because it's so different. So I was fortunate enough to have some coworkers and some friends at Gene Taylor's that fished like that, and they kind of helped. They'd take me out fishing, and I started, learning from them how this stuff works and how these fisheries are, and how different it is and how cool it is, and all the gear and all the technical stuff. And of course, being in the store, you're around all of that equipment, and it obviously is helpful to know how to use it all if you're going to try to sell it. So I tried to get better at all of that. And then in all the early 2000s, 2001, the original state, so it goes to the original state record fish stories now. So one of the guys that he actually finished working right before I started, but he also worked at the store, was the guy that caught, we call it the original state record lake trout out of Blue Mesa. And then his college roommate and one of his fishing buddies eventually caught another one. There was a couple in between there. It was in the early 2000s, they were breaking the state record. Every other year, they broke it twice one year. And so by, 2003, 2004, this was becoming like a destination fishery for lake trout, because these guys they had broke the 40-pound mark, and they did it again, and they did it again. And then in 2007, they caught the 50-pounder. So obviously the lake trout fishery was now on the map. And so we started at the store, we started getting phone calls constantly. And then what kicked off some of that was there was an In Fisherman article about it. And of course this was before social media or anything, so those national fishing publications like that were huge. And so when that article hit, people would figure out that Gene Taylor's was really the only source of information really about the lake in the area. And so we'd get 20 phone calls a week there of people asking just, where are we? How does it work? But the big thing that pushed us where we are now was there was a lot of people that wanted a guide service to take them out to fish for those things. And at the time, there wasn't one. Your option was to rent a boat at the marina and maybe some tackle, but there was really no equipment or sonar or anything to go along with it. You were kind of just on your own. So of course the light bulb went on, and it's well, hey, I'm into this. I'm getting pretty good at catching them and finding them, and obviously the fishery is on the upswing. And so, what better thing to do with an entrepreneurship program from school is to start your own guide service, So it was that's what pushed it to start. And so then, it's kind of all history after that. But long story short, we were getting a lot of phone calls at the store about guided fishing, and nobody was doing it. So I was well, I guess I'll do it.
This question wasn't on the list of questions I gave you, but it is one that I do want to ask and throw in. Everyone for the last 19 years has just assumed Either we own Gene Taylor's, Gene Taylor's is a part of the guide service is owned by Gene Taylor's. Can you clear that up a little bit? How did it start? How did they help us?
So the owner is Marshall Taylor, owns Gene Taylor's in Gunnison. There's a whole nother history about that store, but Marshall, so I'm still at this point like just out of college and just working at the store, and Stormy and I have started a family, and so this was a very, very well thought out business plan that needed some funding, basically, and so I needed some help to get it off the ground. And of course I could go to the bank and get a loan and buy a boat and do all the stuff, but Marshall, being the great person that he's been for so long, wanted to help and wanted to see it get started too, because obviously if there's that sort of connection to the store in that way, then obviously we can help drive sales. If fishermen that were on the lake were seeing our success, and that's sort of how it works, like industry wide. That's why you see guide programs from all the vendors and stuff, because they want their products in front of professionals, and that's what helps sell it.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a mutual beneficial partnership, but it specifically didn't have anything to do with Gene Taylor's other than they would benefit from the owner's investment in my idea.
Yeah.
And so he helped me get my first boat. That was the big, like, sort of financial hurdle that we had to cross. And so we went together, we got a boat, we took the boat from the dealership straight to Flaming Gorge to run it because Blue Mesa was still frozen at the time. And so we needed to have a fully functional boat that we understood before we invited people on the boat with us to do our thing. So that's kind of where that started. And then obviously was still worked at the store and did guided fishing. And that's been the case for the entire history of GSO Fishing. I've been tied to both companies, but at this point, Marshall obviously had his investment paid back, and that original guide boat now is owned by Cody Rowe, who is also one of our guides. So that first original boat is still in the fleet, and it still catches fish like crazy, which is amazing. Pretty cool. So
I wish I could remember that. We had so much going on in our life then. We had just had our youngest daughter, and she had a rough go in the beginning. And I wish I could remember you coming to me and being like, hey, I'm going to start a guide service. I don't remember that. I do remember you guys going and getting the boat, picking out the boat, going fishing. I remember all that, but I don't remember that first conversation that we had of like, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. For the life of me, I can't remember it. I've been trying, but I wish I could.
So at the time, I also had one of my college roommates who were both out of college at the time, but he was kind of in between places, and he actually lived with us for a little while he was kind of trying to figure out where he was going. Yeah. And he was part of that original plan too, and we were going to call it Cast and Blast Outfitters, because we were also at the time going to at some point like do big game and waterfowl and like kind of just have it like a full service guide service thing. But he decided to go a different direction and he ended up moving to the Front Range to chase some dreams out there and be with his family there and stuff. And so that kind of changed, and then that actually is part of the history of the name GSO Fishing. Was when I pitched all this to Marshall and I was like, hey, we're gonna call it Cast and Blast Outfitter, and he's like, that's the most redneck thing I've ever heard. He's like, let's come up with something a little more professional. And so that's where we came up with Gunnison Sports Outfitters. And so it didn't tie you to just the fishing, if that's what we wanted to expand into other areas of guiding, but we've since not done that. But now it's like GSO is way easier to say and spell out than Gunnison Sports Outfitters. That's kind of a mouthful, but that's where the history of the name came from too.
Yeah. So we got a DBA and switched it to GSO Fishing, and it was actually because when we were doing our website, it was so hard to type in GunnisonSportsOutfitters.com. It was just way too long. So the woman I was working for was like, hey, we should do something about this, and that's where GSOFishing.com came from. So she totally helped us with that. And speaking of that, we've had so much help, especially in those beginning years with Marshall, with the investment. Mern Judson helped with the logo. Don Mills was your original deckhand. We had so much help and support, which it really shaped where we're at today.
Yeah, like you mentioned, Don Mills. He's since passed away, but he was one of my like friends and mentors through the early years at Gene Taylor's, like just learning fishing. And he had been in the valley his whole life, and he knew all the waters and how to fish them, and he was super accomplished at all of that stuff. And he was pretty excited about our new venture and was always willing to help. And so I was like, well, heck, while I'm, kind of learning everything there is to know about everything kind of all at once, like, would you mind helping me out on the boat? And so he was super happy to do it. So then he would plot the course and adjust, like basically drive the boat to kind of take some of that off of my plate while I was dealing with tackle. And through the years, that's something that, after those first couple of years, once I understood the mechanics of everything and the fishery, and you could finally put it all together and kind of do it on your own, he was super helpful and like just teaching.
He was so good at that.
Yeah, super helpful.
Yeah. And Mern, you actually had a radio show with Mern that you used to do. He did our logo.
Yeah, and also in those early years of the guide service and working at the store and out of college and everything else we were doing, we had there was a local radio show that we would do that was super fun. It was like once a week, and Mern Judson is a very accomplished fly fisherman, fly tyer. He's been in that industry forever. And so he brought that perspective to this like outdoors radio show that we would do. And then I stepped in to bring in like the stillwater boat fishing aspect to it. So we became very good friends over the years through work and through the radio show. And at the time he was doing graphics and signage and doing stuff like that too as work. And so he helped us come up with our first logo, which was super cool. We still have that banner in our garage. It's since changed a lot, but he helped us also in the beginning just get all the little logistical things kind of off the ground.
Oh my gosh, we could talk about the history of GSO forever. We could, but I've only asked you one question. So, on our Facebook page, I did ask what questions everyone wanted me to ask you. And one of them from Barbara Draper said, where did your passion for fishing come from?
My fishing history was, I had my grandparents that introduced me to fishing at a very young age. My dad is actually a lifer, cowboy, elk hunting guide. And so fishing wasn't really anything that he had been around it through like summer pack trips with the dude ranch business he was in. But it wasn't really anything that what he was passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
But it was my mom's parents that were, and so they would take me on weekend vacations in the camper, and we would go fish all different places, including Blue Mesa. We came here a couple times, and so that's where I was just introduced to fishing and how it works. And then I had several cousins that were really into it. I mentioned my cousin on the Great Lakes, but he himself was actually also a very accomplished fly fisherman. And our family has some property near the headwaters of the Rio Grande, and so there's a lot of really awesome fly fishing in that part of the country. And so I would go with that cousin when he would come on his vacation in the summer, and we would fly fish the rivers and creeks there. And so I learned a ton of that from him. And then I had other cousins that were more into, that grew up in the San Luis Valley, and in the valley floor was way different. It was like the Rio Grande River runs through there, but in that part of the river it was carp and it was northern pike. And then the state had put in some bass fishing ponds, like some warm water bass fishing ponds, just for something different. So I had another different cousin that actually was pretty into all that. And so he introduced me to how to catch carp and how to catch pike and how to catch bass to the extent he knew how.
Yeah.
And so once I got into like junior high and high school, and I had a bike, like me and my fishing buddy growing up, we would bike around to all these places, and there was a lake in town that we would catch perch and tench and weird fish like that were just like, they were so foreign to us because it was all fly fishing for trout otherwise.
Yeah.
And so through all of that, and then just growing up in life in general, I learned that just for myself, I'm very independent and I'm very competitive. And so the fishing world suits both of those personality traits really well. because you can go and do your own thing, and you can be competitive to the maximum level with yourself and the fish, not necessarily against anyone else, but I viewed the whole thing to me was a competition. Like, I needed to figure out how to win at this game.
And so that's still you to this very day. That is you to a T.
And then when you start looking at the variety of fish and different water and different equipment, I don't think it's possible to win at everything in fishing, and so that's what keeps you going, because you never ever stop learning.
I love that. And I've always loved that about you the most, is that it is not a competition between you and other anglers. It's not. Even when you're literally competing in a tournament against other anglers, if they beat you, you've never been like, oh, that angler. You've always been like, I didn't execute how I wanted to, and I've always loved that about you. It's never been this like competition against other people, but it's a competition against yourself and the fish you're catching. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I really love and respect that about you.
Yes, the competitive, it's not like I'm competing with anybody. I compete with myself to figure out the puzzle.
I love it.
And so it's helped me be very passionate about what I do, because I want to be the best at it.
The great thing is that your wife is competitive against you. I love you, and you are the only person I am competitive against. But again, I love that we don't, like, I can literally list a handful of times I've ever honestly beaten you in fishing, and I love that you make me strive to be better, and I love that no matter who quote unquote wins in the end, we both support each other and are super thrilled for the other one.
Yeah, and that's part of what keeps us going. It's like you also at the same time want to see other people reach that potential too.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so back to the history. Brody Skinner wants to know, what is the biggest obstacle you had to overcome when making GSO fishing, when building it?
Dude, that's a good question.
That's a big one.
Like we mentioned in the beginning, there was like a financial hurdle which we were able to overcome and then get past. But really, as far as like growing the company how we want it to, especially once we jumped into the lure thing, was probably the biggest obstacle for me was time. And there's going to be some changes coming soon with all of that that'll help us with that even better.
Yeah.
But time, because that we do have so much going on all the time. Besides, we have 4 girls, and we have school, and we have a lot of stuff going on, and so that's always been a problem of mine and an obstacle of mine, is finding the time or properly utilizing the time I have. And when I'm able to focus and do all that stuff, it clearly works and it clearly helps, but that's kind of is an ongoing obstacle.
Yeah, we are definitely to the point in GSO that we have to get more help. Like, there's Andy and I run this company from our shop, and it's getting to the point where it's a beast to run on our own, and time is definitely a thing. And our family always comes first. They have to come first. They are everything. So we're to the point where it's like, okay, we have to make some major changes, which is great. It's scary and amazing at the same time.
Yep.
So I want to know, you have 19 years into guiding. Like, that is incredible. Most businesses don't even last a year or two, and you have 19 years. So what are some of the most memorable moments?
So I still remember my very first guide trip.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Because it was like, oh my gosh, somebody actually agreed to have me take them on a boat on the lake. And of course I was super nervous.
Yeah.
I had been out with friends and stuff on the boat, and so as far as all of that goes, like, I kind of had a system figured out, and it was pretty streamlined, but still it was a perfect stranger to me.
Yeah.
And so I still remember that, and we went, and it was just me, like Dawn wasn't on that trip, And this particular guy wanted to catch kokanee salmon, and I was like, I can do that. Let's do it. And so we launched at a lake fork, and we fished that end of the lake, and he caught his limit of salmon that day, plus several, rainbows and browns, which is not uncommon. And it was we had started this guide service, like officially launched the guide service like in April that year. And my first trip, this guy came in very early May, so it was a couple weeks into it, and I'm like, I don't know, like nobody. Like the phone calls at the store about the big lake trout thing, like quit, of course, like because the year before it was just bananas because it was just in fishermen, and then by the next year it was like
crickets.
We'd get a couple a week, but it was nothing like what it was when I first started. So I'm like, oh gosh, is this actually gonna? But then it did.
It did.
That was my first trip, and it went really good, and every trip it was like for the first probably 3 years was. I learned a lot every single trip just about, how to do it right for them. Like the fishing is what it is, but I guess something I've learned definitely by now is that the fishing, for the most part, the fishing is secondary to why these people are doing trips with us. It's not, that's actually not, it shouldn't be like your main focus anymore. Like that's when I first started, I was like all gung-ho about like this is how I do it, this is what we're doing, we're gonna go catch fish, that's why you're here. And like I slowly learned over time that that's not all of it.
Yeah,
it's important to a point, especially for some trips, but for the most part that's not actually the most important thing.
And I think I should clarify, you say that and every spare moment you have that you're not with your family or anything else, you spend on the water perfecting your technique. So when you say the fishing isn't everything, I understand what you mean about how it's like the customer's comfort and happiness and all those things come before the actual fishing does. But you put in so much time to make sure that they get that. It's like a lot of the people that come, they can do it once in a lifetime, or maybe every couple years they get to come out. They have saved and worked so hard for this, and it's like you say that it's not the most important thing, but you work and strive to make sure they have the ultimate experience, and I really, really respect you for that.
Well, and that goes back to my competitive nature. Like I always think there's a better way to do it, or a more efficient way to do it, or a different way to do it. And so when I'm allowed the time or have it available to do that kind of stuff on my own, then when there's people on my boat, I'm not worried about, I don't have any of those questions in the back of my mind. It's just focusing on what I know and focusing on them, and I'm not worried about the next thing, or am I doing the right thing, or is the bite going off somewhere else. It's like, so that also helps me when I'm on a guide trip not be like spun out about the fishing, because like I try to spend time getting that part of it figured out to a point where even for me on a guided trip, the fishing almost comes second nature, so you're able to focus in on everything else that actually can make the trip more memorable and more important for them. And like, yeah, back to that question about I've been doing this for so long, so like you learn about memorable things, and sometimes they're not good. And so like we've also come across situations just growing as a business and growing as a guide, as a team of and I won't like say specific examples, but there are always going to be certain clients that don't fit our team. And there's going to be certain like trips that don't fit our team, and there's going to be certain situations that like allow our team to call the day early because it doesn't fit what we're doing. And so those kind of lessons are learned the hard way, where in the early days it was like you want to make hay while the sun shines, so you take every trip you can, even if it's not right for you. And we've certainly learned over the years that that's not why we do this, because we're out here to take everybody fishing. That's not the point. And so that, I think that's what has helped us sustain this business for 19 years and continue to do it is because of how we view the trips and how we feel like we can fit the people that want to come fishing with us, how we can fit them into what we want to do along with what they want to do, and we can basically guarantee them that they're not going to be sorry about it, and neither are we. And so that all those kind of lessons are really important.
And you're right, we've learned some the very hard way. But I really like that about you guys, is that it's not every trip is right for you. The whole reason you're doing it isn't just to cash a paycheck. You're doing it because you truly love doing it. You love fishing, you love the clients, you love meeting people. And I think that is the heart of GSO. It's just the fact that it's not a paycheck. It's meeting anglers, supporting anglers, helping people take the trip of a lifetime. Yeah. I think that's incredible.
And that, I think it shows in the size and type of, like, the size of our guide team and the people that they are. Is Stormy will tell you, she's like, I won't hire anybody.
Oh my gosh. That is something we've done. This argument has gone on for years, for sure.
There's clearly demand for numbers beyond what we do of guided fishing trips on the lake. But again, that's not our goal. I could hire 15 more guys to just take people fishing, but that's not what we're doing.
Yes.
And so we've always had a pretty tight crew, and they're highly trained with the same drive that I am to be customer first, fishing second, but be really good at both. And so that's been really important as we've been building this guide team over the years too. Is like, I'm really bad, like, I won't hire anybody. I don't care how good of a fisherman they are. That's not the point.
Yeah, they have to fit. And I've watched you watch them for years before you'll approach anyone. And that's been your thing, is you make sure they're the right fit for our guide service, for our customers, for our team, for everybody. And yeah, fishing has always come second on that.
Like when they reach out to us and they're like, we just want to go fishing with Andy because he's been around forever. And I'm like, I can promise you, like, the guys on my team, some of them are probably better than me at it. And we will specifically put certain groups with certain guys because we both know that they are better at what that group needs than maybe I am. And so we truly do try to fit everybody in where it's the best case scenario.
So we kind of touched on this a little bit, but how has the fishing industry evolved since that first trip 19 years ago? How has it changed?
So the fishery has changed, for one thing, but we've seen the ebbs and flows of the salmon and the lake trout and now the perch. And so there's a lot of fishery changes that we have to stay on top of. But the biggest, like, industry-wide change is certainly electronics.
Yeah.
My original boat had a black and white 2D Lowrance sonar on it.
Yeah.
Literally black and white, and it had manual powered downriggers. Those were the first thing to go. Going into year 2 was like we put downriggers on that boat that were electric.
Yes.
Because winding that thing up and down,
this is the worst.
By the end of the season, it was literally exhausting.
Your arms were jacked, though.
And so yes, our fleet of boats that we have now, we're always striving to have the most up-to-date equipment, so that's another part of the comfort and efficiency thing, is just having the right equipment on your boat. Mm-hmm. But electronics clearly has been the one that's the hardest to keep up with. Like that, the electric downriggers that we put on our original guide boat are still on the original guide boat, and they've been bomb-proof and awesome. And so there's things like that you just buy it once and you're done. But like, electronics are constantly updating and changing, and of course the live scope thing has changed the whole industry. Like, yeah. It's flipped it on its head way more than anything else ever has. Like, as far now, it's like that's a whole nother subject, but I mean, like, tournament trails are starting to regulate it or even ban it, and
yeah,
that tells you how powerful of a tool that is. And so for us, we've got our whole team on that program finally. Like, some of the more tenured guys have been pretty against learning that technology, but as soon as you get it in their hands, they're like, okay, this instantly just made it a lot better.
So different.
So that's easily the thing to talk about with that is technology.
So you said the fishery has changed. You've seen the ebbs and flows. One thing that's actually has been a major change is we used to launch from anywhere.
Yeah.
We used to launch in the mud at Blue Mesa, and then the zebra mussel thing changed all of that. How has that impacted?
That's true, because that's a logistics thing that we never had to worry about. It was like you wanted to go fishing and there was a tiny little bit of open water in Savoia in March, you just backed your boat off the beach and went for it.
Yeah.
If you were brave enough to back your truck down there and hope it didn't get stuck, you were good to go.
Right.
Which fortunately we never got stuck, but we muddied up our equipment pretty bad a few times.
Right.
So that was a huge change, and it's to this day still something that we deal with. And it's kind of frustrating that you look at it from one side and it's like, this is our public fishery, we want access to it whenever we want access to it, but at the same time those guys are basically charged with protecting infrastructure, and if something like that gets into our water system and destroys the dam, then what? Like long term, that's way more of a problem than short term. We can't go fishing past 5 o'clock in November or whatever when they close the boat ramp. So yeah, good point there. Like, you have to, being on a government run facility also has its challenges too, but that was one that's been, and it's been there long enough that it's just kind of second nature now. And actually our A&S program here actually is a lot better to deal with than a lot of other places around the state that are like state parks that have hard start dates and hard close dates, whether the lake's open or not, which is even more frustrating. So we are pretty fortunate in that regard.
Yeah. Are there any specific setbacks that you can think of that have affected GSO in the 19 years?
Probably, for me, it's probably just those ebbs and flows in the fishing, I think, have changed how we approach trips or advertise trips or don't take trips because we can't meet expectations. And so there's setbacks that have happened in the fishery that affect what we're doing business-wise, for sure. The drought, of course, was a big one. More recently, the bridges. Like, those are all setbacks that we have been able to navigate around, but it certainly makes it more difficult.
Yeah.
Like, in the early years, like in the heyday of Blue Mesa, so Ryan was the first guide that we hired, and he had been fishing Blue Mesa longer than me and was already an accomplished lake trout guide. Or not guide, but lake trout fisherman, and then wanted to get into the guide part of that. And so he was right out of the gate our lake trout guy.
Mm-hmm.
We learned kind of a few years into that setbacks with that whole thing too, like kind of going back to the client thing. And Blue Mesa's not a very big lake.
No.
And so there was some stuff that we learned early on that were kind of setbacks in how we approached how we were going to lake trout fish. But at the time, like I don't think we ever actually put it in writing, but basically we were guaranteeing you would catch a fish over 30 inches or you didn't pay for your trip.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we ever put it in writing, but had we done that, nobody would have ever had a free trip. Like, the fishing was that good where we would guarantee a fish and you would catch it.
Yeah.
And then there was probably 10 years in between then and now where you were having a stellar day if you caught one.
Yeah.
And so the lake trout fishing has been a huge change. And now we're starting to see that come back where we feel like we had our best lake trout season ever last year.
Yeah.
Like, including the old days. And so we feel like that's on the upswing. And then the kokanee salmon thing has been up and down, where basically the last 3 years we're pretty much not taking kokanee salmon specific trips anymore because the fishery can't sustain that expectation at this point. So we've had to sort of change expectations as far as that goes too.
Well, that's a great point, and that actually brings me to my next question about, like, what role does sustainable and ethical fishing play into the future of the industry and our company?
That's a good question. again, like in our early years, it was like, let's take all the trips and let's keep all the fish. And like the fishery was like in super good shape, and we didn't feel like we were impacting much at that point. But a lot of that without education can become a detriment to the fishery. And so we quickly learned that as guides on a particular fishery, that you are probably the most important piece of that fishery's health and future and sustainability. Because when you come on guided trips with us, you learn how to catch those fish. And so you see, or you at least see how we do it. Whether it's repeatable or not is kind of up to the anglers after that, but you have to have a level of responsibility for your fishery if you want to maintain your business long term. And so I think that goes for any guide anywhere. You see it as a group effort on the Gunnison River, even though it has regulations that allow fishermen to keep fish of certain species or size on the Gunnison River. 0% of anybody that offers a guide trip on the Gunnison River actually allows that, because they feel like they impact the fishery enough that if they participated in that part of the regulations, that they could decimate the fishery. And so we've taken that same stance on our lake with a similar problem that we saw, and sort of had different theories than like the CPW did about the kokanee salmon fishery. We were very adamant that it was not the lake trout eating and killing all the salmon in Blue Mesa, it was the people. And by that time, we had our full like 5 or 6 team of guides in our company, and we were very good at catching salmon. And at the time, the limits were 10 per person per day. And one summer, we started keeping track of how many kokanee salmon we were responsible for harvesting out of the lake at that current rate, and it was actually very scary. And so we approached the CPW and we said, look, to prove your point, this next guide season, we are going to self-impose a 5 fish limit with all of our guide trips. And at the time, the other main guide service on the lake agreed to the same thing. And literally that fall, when the salmon ran to the hatchery, they broke the egg take record at the hatchery with the amount of salmon that returned, simply because we cut back on the harvest of the fish. And so it was clear and obvious at that point that we were on the right track with that. And so the next year, the CPW put into regulation a 5 fish salmon limit instead of 10.
I love that.
And so again, it's part of our responsibility as fishermen on the ground that see how the fishery actually is, to relay those theories, thoughts, observations to the local biologists and get on the same page with them to maintain the fishery for everybody.
And with that, you implemented like a yearly meeting with the CPW. You go in and you chat with them, if not every other year, and kind of give them a heads up of what you're seeing. And it's funny, we will do videos and get so much hate, like, you're not the CPW, you don't know what you're talking about. And the funny thing is our guides spend hundreds and hundreds of hours on the water, watching the fish, monitoring the fish, figuring out where they're at, figuring out where they're not. And so we actually work really closely with the CPW and just be like, hey, this is what we're seeing. These are alarming statistics. And it's been a great partnership of, like, you know, of them working with us and us working with them. And I've always loved that if you see a problem, you're not like, well, I'm just going to get mine, I'm just going to keep guiding that. You're like, no, hey. And I remember the year we did that. We went to 5 fish, and some of the people that called were not happy and we got some hate for that. And so I really love that you care about the fishery first.
Yeah, sort of along with the timing of that whole salmon thing was when the state was basically all but trying to eradicate lake trout out of here because that was their stance, was that those fish are eating the fish that we want and it's not going to work. And so again, not just us, there's a lot of people that were like, you are so off base with this thing. And so we were a part of all of that movement, but certainly not anything that we like spearheaded, but absolutely agreed with the majority of. But our like annual meetings, we were able to, and we don't just go in there and talk. Like every time we would go in there, biologists are very data driven. They have spreadsheets, they have degrees in understanding like the biological aspects, and so you learn how to approach it from the right angle. So we have, like on the lake trout thing, it was, how old these fish are and what the populations probably actually are. And at the time they had you could keep as many lake trout as you wanted up to 38 inches long. And it was just like that in like a 3-year time span basically just wiped out the fishery because if you could catch that many, you could keep 20 37.5-inch lake trout in a day, and you've seen them. That's like pushing a 30-pound fish at that point, easily a 20-pound fish. And so there was a huge population of old lake trout that were literally just wiped out because of regulations. And so we finally got them to compromise. We wanted the number at like 26 inches and under and 1 over, and so the compromise was 32 inches, which is a heck of a lot better than 38. And that literally in the last 2 to 3 years is the fish that were finally, because of regulation, able to escape death are the fish that we're finally starting to see a good population of again, that are the ones that keep people coming to this lake, whether it's fishing with us or not. It drives people to fish here.
So essentially it takes the whole community of anglers to care about the fishery, and we are just one small part of it, but we absolutely do our part. It matters.
And we sort of do have we're in a position to maybe have a louder voice than some other people, and that's why we've sort of created a community, is to get like-minded anglers on the same page, to where if there's ever situations like that again that require like a group effort, we're happy to spearhead it, but also more than happy to help facilitate like a big group effort to make change, because as we all know, there's a lot of changes that are always coming. And as we also know from our history with working with the Park Service and the CPWs, changes can be made. And so like they literally can be wrong and we can be right, and you can change things.
Given the right approach. Okay. Again, this podcast could go on forever, but I love talking to you. So let's go into lures. Why? What made you even start thinking about building lures?
So GSO Fishing premium jigs and lures. So that's like obviously a whole nother can of worms where we're going with that whole thing. But again, from my sporting goods and fishing background, there was a major hole in the market in what we started with was a tube jig head. Such a simple thing. Because in our fishery and many other ones throughout the country, a tube jig is a very important tool when you're lake trout fishing, and there was literally not, at least in my mind, a suitable jig head that I had any confidence at all in that I could catch a 50-pound fish with and not have it mess up. And so that was where we started, was I needed to solve that problem, if anything, for myself, and to give myself something more confident to fish with. And then from there was enough other anglers that saw that they were very quickly on board with that. And then just for fun, I was like, well, that obviously worked. So and then we just started basically filling gaps in the market with like premium options for common lures, sort of. And then we've come up with, a few unique stuff over the years. Just like our finesse jigs are very unique. They were sort of modeled from the bass fishing world, but built for trout. And so we were able to sort of modify baits and fit them to the trout world because that's where we are. And then like my bass fishing history plays into a lot of the like new ideas for lures, but it was like in a general sense, it was we needed to fill some holes in the market with some stuff. It's not unlike the guide service thing where there wasn't one, so we'll do that. But if you're gonna do it, you should do it right.
Yep.
And so again with our lure stuff was like it didn't exist and there was a need for it, so we filled it, but we're not just gonna run out a bunch of dump bin stuff. Like we want it to be really quality. Because at the end of the day, we want to help people catch more fish and make more memories, and even something as simple as using the proper tube jig head with a hook that actually works for what you're doing can make all the difference in the world with that particular fish.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. So talk to me about the collaborations you guys have been doing with your products.
So Stormy has always sort of had a really good approach to business in the sense that we don't compete with anybody. We work with people and we want to collab with people to bring a better fishing experience to everybody. And I like that approach. So over the last couple of years, we were able to team up with a couple of different now tube jig makers, because that is one part of the lure business that I've always said we weren't going to get into because we have so many acquaintances and friends in that business that I would rather work with them than try to come up with our own stuff to compete against them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been our approach with like the actual tube jigs that we now offer that are GSO exclusives. And so we worked with Billy at Carl's Custom Soft Plastics. Last year we introduced the Pro Blue Mesa, which was a color scheme that I think is the best color scheme available on the market for catching lake trout at Blue Mesa, like very specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was more than happy to work with me on that, and it's not just like, hey, build this thing. It's like, this is my vision, and you try to explain a vision of something to someone else, and they have to interpret that and do it in the way that they understand. And then there's back and forth, like,
yeah,
we need to tweak this, or we need to tweak that, or no, this is kind of what I'm thinking on that. And so it's not like easy, and it can probably be kind of frustrating for them because I'm just like, well, isn't it just like that easy? And they're like, no, it's not that easy. So anyways, we nailed that one, and
yeah.
It was easily our most productive color last year, lake trout fishing, easily.
Yeah.
And so going into this winter, just because of the style of fishing that is done in the winter, that particular tube works, but it's not necessarily the all the time answer. Like it's not always the all the time answer, but
Mm-hmm.
it pretty much, like in the spring it was. But so we have worked with Matt at Send It Outdoors for another color. So this one is the Pro Rainbow, and so that tube also is 8 months of back and forth trying to put my vision into play with his skills and his work with the plastics and his tube design, which has been very well proven on this lake and many other lakes as a vertical jigging machine. Like, that's an excellent tube for that game. And so we came up with another color that our guide team and our clients absolutely thrived with this winter, even when this fishery gets crazy pressure in the winter. And those fish were on certain days doing really dumb things to go eat that jig because we finally got it figured out. That one is brand new to the market this spring. And so we want, like we said, we know our jig heads work better than anything else on the market, and they obviously are built to pair with tube jigs too. And there's always like staple sizes and colors and types and brands that work in different fisheries, but because of where we are and what we do, we also wanted ones that fill a hole in our tackle box for what we absolutely want. And so we've been able to collab with these guys and get that super dialed in. So
where do you see GSO going in the next 5 to 10 years? What do you want for it?
So I think the guide service is, there's a lot of different things we can do with that. I think what we've been doing the last 19 years works great, and we'll continue to do that. But like we've done the last couple of years, expanded into like on the water trainings and like moving more into the education side of things, because there are so many DIY anglers out there, and rightfully so, that are like me, just getting into it 20 years ago and just want to learn what the heck a downrigger is and a planer board and like all this equipment. It's pretty overwhelming, and so I want to be able to teach people how to use equipment better. And then there's also other fishing opportunities that we have never offered before that are super fun, like walking the bank in the evening and catching the heck out of things. Like,
it's my favorite.
Again, that comes down to a time thing. And now that looking into the next several years, we're going to have more options out there for stuff like different types of trips like that, different and expanded learning opportunities with us. And then the product wise, I think we're always going to have new ideas for new and improved everything as far as products go. And we'll just attack those one at a time, and we'll keep innovating and growing our product line and coming up with collabs and colors that make sense and help people catch fish better, and continue to expand our e-store where people can have access to exclusives that they literally cannot find anywhere else, but we want to make sure they're always available, and just growing our availability of a lot of different types of equipment that we use, just trying to expand on what we're doing in a positive way. So
I like it. So again, I asked the anglers on our Facebook page what questions they would like me to ask you. So I think we should do a round of rapid fire questions.
Ooh.
We're probably not going to get through all of them because this interview has already gone on forever and I feel like we could talk for 4 more hours. But okay, Angela Gallego says, if you could go anywhere in the world to fish, where would you go, and what season, and what fish would you target?
I have always wanted to go fish the Amazon River and catch giant peacock bass on topwater. And what's great about that is I get to leave this ice box in the winter and go down there when it is summer down there. So that's when I would go, is January.
Okay, Brody Skinner wants to know, what is your favorite GSO product and why?
That easily is, and we finally put a name to this thing because we always just called it our heavy wire tube jig head, which was super confusing. So it is officially the 860 heavy wire, which is our like original signature product with the Sickle Pro V trocar hook tube jig head that has now been responsible for the unofficial world record, the Colorado State catch and release record, the Flaming Gorge catch and release record, along with all of the biggest fish all of us have caught. And so it's like, how can I not absolutely love that thing? Because it produces.
It does produce. Okay, Marissa wants to know, what is your favorite fish to catch?
That's a largemouth bass. It's like bass, but you have to be specific. It would be largemouth bass.
Well, and funny, in the comments, Jesse Gallegos called that. He's like, it's absolutely bass. And I was like, Jesse, shh, we're going to pretend like we don't know that. Andy is a bass fishing addict. Dorothy wants to know, what was the worst day of fishing you've ever had?
It must have been pretty bad if I've completely blocked it from my memory, but it might go back to some of those early client expectation days that didn't go, like you didn't see eye to eye with what the expectations were, and so it was probably a pretty rough, pretty bad day on both ends.
Yeah.
So there's been a couple of those that I learned from very quickly.
Yeah.
But specifically outside of that, it would probably be in recent history, had the flu pretty bad one day.
Oh, yes.
which was kind of rough. And then I am not a cold weather guy.
Yeah.
And so sometimes those least memorable trips are actually when the weather is at its worst.
Yeah.
But coincidentally, those are oftentimes our most productive fish catching days at the same time. So it actually makes it not seem quite as bad.
Okay, well, she also asked, what is your best memory of fishing?
Oh, man. So then there's...
That's hard to narrow down.
That's... And a lot of that's recent history too. I mentioned like my first guide trip. That was always like a great memory, just how it all started. But more recently, what's satisfying, I guess, is because all of these years of learning and understanding and putting all of these tools to work and having it all come together for people that you really think maybe they don't think they deserve it, but you want it extra bad for like certain people.
Yeah.
And so when you're able to have all the stars align and have all that stuff come together, those are the most memorable moments.
I love that. Okay, these are more fishing specific questions. So what is the first thing you do or look at when thinking of fishing a new lake?
Obviously it'd be like, what am I there to catch? So you got like whatever species it is. So for example, if I'm going to go fish a new lake, I've never fished for lake trout.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to know, the more important things are, well, what time of year is it? What are the water temps? What's the water clarity? What's the weather? Before I ever even step foot on the lake, like all of those things go into the game plan of where to start.
What innovations or changes do you foresee happening in the fishing industry in the next 10 years?
Like, what's startling to me is that fly fishing hasn't changed at all. And so it's just interesting to me.
That is interesting.
And fly fishing's not my wheelhouse anymore, and I do it, and I'm very snooty about what I am. Like I'm a dry fly purist, and all I care about is the topwater bite and like certain hatches or whatever. So I get very I'm not really in that game anymore, and so I'm not going to put any brain power into it. I just think it's interesting that there hasn't been a revolutionary change in the fly fishing world.
That is interesting.
I think that's interesting. Sure, there's technological advances in how good your line floats and how good your drag works in your reel, and there's always new rods that cast better and farther, and there's always 20 new flies on the market, and maybe there's a floatant that floats for 10 seconds longer, but maybe the weight or material's a little tougher. But of course there's always going to be improvements in equipment with anything. But it's like, where's the live scope of the fly fishing world? And so I'm looking forward to seeing who can figure out something that's going to give the fly fisherman such an edge that it'll force me back into that world.
That is such a great answer, and one I never ever would have predicted. So that is fantastic. That leads us to our next question from Andrew, and he's asking about the difference in spots, holding mainly smaller fish versus a spot that is potentially more likely to hold a bigger fish. How do you find them? How do you know the difference?
So with some species, it's not a difference. It's just a matter of the area of the lake that happens to have the population of bigger fish at the time. So like that's very common in bass fishing. You develop a pattern, and certain areas of the lake are going to produce bigger fish on the same pattern that you've been on throughout the whole lake. Other fish like pike or lake trout, the definition between a small one and a big one it's kind of relative. Like, what does that mean? But like when we talk about lake trout, it's like pups versus trophies, and those fish in my mind are two different species. They're not even the same. Yeah, they're lake trout, but they are absolutely not even close to the same species of fish. And so you approach them very differently. They eat very different things. They set up on very different places. And so that, at least on all the fisheries I've been on that have lake trout, if you are on a pattern that is absolutely producing pups, you will more than likely never catch a big one.
Mm.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
And so it's understanding the differences between, like, literally, like, those two different species, like, act different. And so you got to just understand your fish to get to that point.
Yeah. So research.
Like kokanee salmon. They're all doing the same thing all the time always.
Yeah.
Like, and so that certain species that's going to apply and certain species it won't. Like we found that on the last several years with yellow perch. The masses are doing one thing, the keepers are doing similar things but maybe slightly different, and the jumbos are like a completely different species.
Yeah.
You can't fish for them like you have been all the other ones, or you'll never catch one.
Yeah. That's true. Okay, and now the ultimate question came from your daughter.
Ooh.
And she wants to know how you've handled 5 girls constantly arguing on the boat for 19 years.
I haven't handled it. If you see the amount of gray in my beard and the amount of hair loss. But actually, at least if they're on the boat, we're hanging out as a family, and if they're giggling and having fun and scaring away our fish, again, the fishing is secondary to making memories like that together.
I like that. Thank you for joining me on the interview today. I have had such a good time, and like always, I have learned several new things about you that I didn't know after 20 years of marriage. So thank you. Thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome. Yes, my fly fishing past is a dark history, but sometimes it has to get brought up because it's still fishing. So it has been important.
I just can't believe you said it out loud. That's incredible. Well, thank you for joining us on the Level Up Fishing podcast, and thank you, Andy.
You're very welcome. Thank you.